Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the book of Ezekiel, chapter 45. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Ezekiel 45, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that your week's been going well so far. Happy Friday. Good to be with you here again as we continue our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time, and we are now in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 45. Just a few more chapters to go in this book before we wrap it up. And we've been talking about the new temple, the temple in the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Messiah, Christ's return, right? The second coming. And we first looked at God's design for this temple, and in a vision he shared with Ezekiel what it was going to look like, the outer walls and the walkways and the rooms and the outer court, the inner court, the gates, the holy place, the most holy place, the altar, all these different things. And then we looked earlier this week at the return of God's glory as God came back across the land. His glory lit up the land. He entered through the eastern gate. His glory settled in the temple, and the eastern gate was to be closed. Tonight, we are going to, and last night we looked at the cleansing of the altar, how to sanctify the altar for use, how to prepare it. And what the roles of the priests would be, and what the roles of the priests out of the line of Zadok would be. And so tonight we're going to wrap up the week, and we're going to look at the land, the sacredness of the land and the division within the land. So now in this chapter, God is going to give Ezekiel direction for the dividing of, and not dividing in a negative way, like the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were divided. This is just a allocation of some of the promised land in the future. The vision that would come about apportioning the rest of the land, we'll see that next week when we get into chapter 47 and 48. So these descriptions that we're going to see, these allocations of land, they don't coincide with any division of the land or allocation of the land in the past. The amount of detail that we're going to see here, it argues for a literal fulfillment of this distribution in land in the future. So when we were previous books, when the Israelites entered into the promised land, and it was divided up by the tribes, and those were different sizes. This is going to be different from what that was. This, again, is the future, the millennial temple. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bibles to chapter 45 of Ezekiel. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are up here on the screen, so you can follow along, take some good notes tonight. And let's begin with verse 1. When you allot the land as an inheritance, you are to present to the Lord a portion of the land as a sacred district, 25,000 cubits long, 20,000 cubits wide. The entire land will be holy. So in this future time, the Israelites were to divide the land by lot. Now, of course, God's in charge. God is sovereign. God would control the outcome of this. But the Israelites would divide it based on this revelation, because the land really belongs to the Lord, not to the people. Everything belongs to God. So God's going to allow them to occupy the land as he specifies here. And they are to set aside one part of the land for the Lord's use for holy purposes. And it was to be 25,000 cubits long and 10,000 cubits wide. Or I'm sorry, 20,000 cubits wide. So about 8 miles by 3.5 miles or so. And this land was to be considered holy within the boundaries of this measurement, this 25,000 by 20,000 cubit perimeter. And that's what we see here in this diagram, this allotment of land. Now, verse 2, of this apportioned land, a section 500 cubits square is to be for the sanctuary, with 50 cubits around the sanctuary open for land. Verse 3, in the sacred district, measure off a section 25,000 cubits long, 10,000 cubits wide. It will be in that area will be the sanctuary, the most holy place. And it will be the sacred portion of the land for the priests who minister in the sanctuary and who draw near to minister before the Lord. That's what we looked at last night. It will be a place for their houses as well as a holy place for the sanctuary. So within this area, there was to be a space, 500 cubits by 500 cubits, 800 feet by 800 feet. This was the size of the temple complex. That's what we saw in chapter 42. Surrounding the complex, there would be a kind of an open space of 50 cubits, 80 feet, kind of a green belt around this area. That sacred open space would preserve the holiness of the area. Remember, we talked about how before the Israelites, the leaders, were burying their dead too close to the holiness of the temple. So now this is allotting for some space. The temple sanctuary would stand within this 25,000 by 10,000 cubit, 8 by 3 miles area, and that would constitute the most holy part of the land. And the priest out of the line of Zadok, which we looked at last night, they would live in the land outside the open space around the temple complex. We're going to see more on this next week when we get into chapter 48. Verse 5. An area 25,000 cubits long, 10,000 cubits wide will belong to the Levites who serve in the temple as their possession for towns to live in. So the other Levites would occupy another 25,000 by 10,000 cubits, 8 by 3 mile area, next to the one that was just described. And that would be immediately to the north. So you see that in the middle of this diagram. You see the land of the Zadokite Levites. Within that is the temple and the green belt surrounding it, 10,000 or 25,000 cubits by 10,000 cubits. Immediately to the north of that would be another area, same dimensions, 8 miles by 3 miles, 25,000 by 10,000 cubits, and that would be occupied by the non-Zadokite Levites. Now, under the time of Moses, the system of priests in the time of Moses and the Levites, they were scattered all throughout Israel. And we saw that way back into Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua and the Judges. Here, they live in close proximity to the temple. In the time of Moses, they did not all live in this close proximity to the temple. Verse 6. You are to give the city as its property an area 5,000 cubits wide, 25,000 cubits long, adjoining the sacred portion, and that will belong to all of Israel. So another parcel of land, which is 25,000 cubits by 5,000 cubits, so about 8 miles by 1.5 miles. Immediately to the south of the land, that's the bottom part of this description, this would contain the city of Jerusalem, and all the Israelites would have access to this. Now, later when we get to chapter 48, Ezekiel is going to clarify that the city itself was going to occupy the center of this portion of land, and these other suburb areas, these city lands at the bottom of this map, would flank Jerusalem to the east and to the west. And there would be another green belt around this, but we'll see this more of this next week. Verse 7. The prince, and remember the prince we saw when Ezekiel was taken back in this vision to the outer court area, there was a prince, and this is not the Messiah, this is a leader. But the prince will have the land bordering each side of the area formed by the sacred district and the property of the city. It will extend westward from the west side. It will extend eastward from the east side, running lengthwise from the western to the eastern border, parallel to one of the tribal portions. So the prince that we saw in chapter 44, he would also receive a special allotment of land to the west of the city, to the east of the city, and near the holy areas that were occupied by the Zadokite priests and the Levites, the non-Zadokite priests. And you see that surrounding this map, the prince's land to the north, to the east, to the west. In previous history of the Israelites, there was no specially designated area where the kings of Israel lived, except within the royal palaces, but those were much, much smaller. Here we see this huge allotment of land for this prince. This land, verse 8, is to be his possession. My princes will no longer oppress my people, but rather they will allow the people of Israel to possess the land according to their tribes. So the rest of the promised land, which we'll see in chapter 48, was going to be the portion of all the other Israelites. This whole arrangement is going to contribute to equitable governing of the people of the Israelites and would discourage any other rulers from from oppressing people in the future. So you see this basic diagram of what this might look like, with right in the center the temple and the green belt around it, allowing for this holy space, and then the land of the Zadokite priests to the north, the land of the non-Zadokite priests to the south, the city lands, the city of Jerusalem, and surrounding the whole thing, the land that would be apportioned to this prince. So now in verses 9 through 24, through the rest of this chapter, we see the regulations concerning offerings and the festival days. So this passage contains 7 subsections, all of which are going to deal with the same basic subject, the offerings and the festival days. So first we're going to see this exhortation to the leaders of Israel in verses 9 through 12. And the exhortation is going to be to practice justice and righteousness. And so let's look at verse 9. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You have gone far enough, right? We've seen this before. God is saying enough is enough. Princes of Israel, give up your violence, give up your oppression, do what is right, do what is just, stop dispossessing my people, declares the sovereign Lord. So God is next commanding the leaders of the Israelites, stop destroying the people by treating them horribly, treating them violently, and taking their possessions for yourselves. You need to treat everyone fairly, equitably, and do what is just and do what is right. That included being just in their commercial trading. So here's what we see, verse 10. In your commercial dealings with each other, you are to use accurate scales, an accurate ephah, and an accurate bath. So the basic measures of dry and liquid, dry measurements, liquid measurements, an ephah, which was about half of a bushel, and a bath, which was about 6 gallons, that was to be the standard by which everything was measured for commercial transactions. Verse 11, the ephah and the bath are to be the same size, the bath containing 1/10 of a homer, the ephah containing 1/10 of a homer. The homer is to be the standard measure for both. So an ephah should always be a tenth of a homer, 5 to 6 bushels. A bath should also always be a tenth of a homer. And these weights, these measurements needed to be consistent, unchanging, right? This was the standard by which commerce was handled. We use money today. This is what they used at the time. Verse 12, regarding the shekel is to consist of 20 gerahs. So 1 shekel, which was about 2/5 of an ounce, should always contain or equal 20 gerahs, which was about 1/50th of an ounce. And we'll talk about like what this really means to us, but let's keep going here. 20 shekels plus 25 shekels plus 15 shekels equals 1 mina. So 20 plus 25 plus 15, or 60 shekels, should always equal 1 mina, which was about 1¼ pounds. Now, these measurements, Ezekiel's using what the people were familiar with in the day. For us, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We don't really grasp what this all meant. All he's doing is he's using the proper standards for measurement in terms that the people of the day understood. For us, it would be like Ezekiel saying, this is how you are to measure things by the dollar or by the quarter, and 4 quarters make a dollar, and 10 dimes make a dollar, and 10 pennies make a dime, and 100 pennies make a dollar. So this is just measurements of the time. We don't really need to get wrapped up into how we process what that means, but the point is that this is the understanding. This needs to be fair, right? Stop ripping people off. Now, in verses 13 through 17, we see offerings for the prince. So unlike the unfair leaders of Israel's past, this prince of the future would be faithful. He would be just. He would be faithful to the Lord. He would be upright in his dealings with the people. The Messiah would be the chief ruler during this millennium, but this prince will serve under Messiah and will oversee, among many things, the temple offerings. So the Israelites in the future would bring offerings periodically to the temple. How often is really not clear, but at least from what we've gleaned out of these verses, we know that it's going to happen. The amounts that we're going to see here in these next verses probably represent what they would have brought for the service of the temple. And the prince would take the lead in presenting these offerings to the Lord with the assistance of the Zadokite priests and the Levitical priests throughout the year. So verse 13. This is regarding the offerings. This is the special gift you are to offer: 1/6 of an ephah from each homer of wheat, and 1/6 of an ephah from each homer of barley. So God is specifying that the people should bring 1/6, 1/12 of a bushel of wheat or barley, taken out of each homer, 5 or 6 bushels that they possessed. Take 1/12 of a bushel out of your 6 bushels that you possess. And in their offering, along with wheat, was oil. And oil should be 1/10 of a bath, which was about 6 gallons, taken from each of their cores, which was about 60 gallons. So 1/10, right? You have a large container of 60 gallons. 1/10 of that should be taken from that. Verse 14. So this is where we see this. The prescribed portion of olive oil, measured by the bath, is 1/10 of a bath from each core. Each core consists of 10 baths or 1 homer. 10 baths are equivalent to 1 homer. So 10 baths, 60 gallons of liquid measure, was about the same quantity as a homer, 6 bushels of dry measure. Again, these are just measurements the people of the time would have understood. For us, we can't wrap our minds around it because we don't use it, right? But this again is it's God's explanation. This is the proper way to distribute, to give. Verse 15. Also, 1 sheep is to be taken from every flock of 200 from the well-watered pastures of Israel. These will be used for the grain offerings, these sheep, burnt offerings, and fellowship offerings to make atonement for the people, declares Yahweh, sovereign Lord. So, along with the wheat and the oil, they were to offer one sheep who is grazed on these well-watered pastures. You are to give one sheep out of every 200 that you own. These were the quantities that the people were to offer in their grain offerings, in their burnt offerings, in their peace offerings, in order to make atonement on these festival days. Making atonement signifies maintaining proper relationship with God, or getting back into proper relationship with God. So what's the required offerings? For the grain offering, 1/6 of all that is produced. That's verse 13. Of the oil offering, 1%. That's verse 14. And of the animals, 1 out of every 200. And that's verse 15. Verse 16. All of the people of the land will be required to do this, to give this special offering to who? To give it to the prince. The people should bring all their offerings to the prince on behalf of these special occasions, these festivals, the feasts, the new month celebrations, and the Sabbaths. The prince would then make these offerings on behalf of the people as a whole, as a means of atonement to offer to the king, to the Messiah, right? It will be, verse 17, the duty of the prince to provide the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, the drink offerings at the festivals, the new moons, and the Sabbaths, at all the appointed festivals of Israel. He, the prince, will provide the sin offerings, the grain offerings, the burnt offerings, the fellowship offerings, to make atonement for the people. So, these sacrifices, these millennial offerings, why are they doing this? If Jesus is the sacrifice, and the sacrifice has been fulfilled through his crucifixion, through his death on the cross and his resurrection, these are memorials and the means by which the uncleanness of their sins as believers would be removed, so that the worshipers could continue to enjoy this intimate fellowship with God. These sacrifices will not result in salvation any more than the sacrifices under the Mosaic system provided salvation. These were means of atonement. Verse 18. Now we see the regulations for the festivals. This is what the sovereign Lord says. In the first month, on the first day, you are to take a young bull without defect and purify the sanctuary. The priest is then to take some of the blood of this offering, put it on the doorposts of the temple, on the four corners of the upper ledge of the altar, and on the gate posts of the inner court. And we saw some of that when we looked at the altar. On the first New Year's Day of each year, the people should offer a young bull without blemish to cleanse the accumulated sinful defilement of the sanctuary. So the priest who was in charge was to take some of this blood and apply it as a sin offering to the door frames of the temple, the four corners of the altar of sacrifice, the door frames of the inner court of the temple. These are the regulations for the priests. Verse 20, and you are to do the same on the seventh day of the month. For anyone who sins unintentionally or through ignorance, so you are to make atonement for the temple. So another offering was to be offered on the seventh day of the new year, and that offering would cover the guilt of sins that were committed ignorantly. And this too would result in the cleansing of the temple for another year. Verse 21, in the first month, on the 14th day, you are to observe the Passover, a festival lasting 7 days, during which you shall eat bread made without yeast, right? Unleavened bread. So on the 14th day of the first month of the new year, the Israelites were to celebrate the Passover, a 7-day feast using this unleavened bread. So apparently, the same relationship between the Passover and the unleavened bread that existed under the old covenant through Moses is going to exist here as well. The the Jews at the time, and even today, they count the beginning and the ending of their days at sundown. So this whole combined festival lasted an entire 7 days of sundown to sunup. And this 7-day period is what is simply referred to as Passover. Verse 22. And on that day, the prince is to provide a bull as a sin offering for himself and for all the people of the land. So on the day of the Passover, the prince would offer a bull as a sin offering for himself and for the people. Verse 23. And every day during the 7 days of the festival of the Passover, the priest or the prince is to provide 7 bulls, 7 rams without defect as a burnt offering to the Lord, and a male goat as a sin offering. So during this 7-day period of the Passover, the prince would offer each day 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish as a burnt offering of worship, and 1 ram for a sin offering. Verse 24, and he is to provide as a grain offering an ephah for each bull and an ephah for each ram, along with a hin of olive oil for each ephah. So the prince would offer, along with each bull and with each ram, 1 ephah, about 1/2 of a bushel of grain as a grain offering, and a hin, about 1 gallon of oil to go along with the grain. This whole celebration, like why are they doing this, right? It commemorates Christ's sacrifice, his sacrificial death as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, and the importance of living sin-free in view of this sacrifice. So this is more memorial than anything. When we receive communion today, Jesus said, as often as you do this in remembrance of what I am doing for you, in remembrance of this sacrifice. And then verse 25, during the 7 days of the festival, which begins in the 7th month, on the 15th day, the prince is to make the same provisions for the sin offerings, the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the oil. So on the 15th day of the 7th month, at the feast of that day, the prince would repeat this cycle of offerings that was made at the time of the Passover. This particular feast corresponds to the Feast of Tabernacles under the Mosaic system. In the millennial reign here, in this time, this millennial temple, this will be a celebration of God's faithfulness in bringing the Israelites securely back to the promised land and permanently into the promised land. And that's what the Feast of Tabernacles anticipated. So this is a memorial that God was faithful to his promises. Now there's other festivals in the past, Israel's past, that don't receive any mention here. The festival of Pentecost and the festival of trumpets and the festival of first fruits, they don't receive any mention here. Probably because they will be absent in this millennial system of worship, but we don't really know for sure. But what has been addressed is God's his requirements for proper worship and proper giving that will take place in this millennial reign. And that is Ezekiel chapter 45, and I pray that has been a help to you. Monday and Tuesday next week, we're going to wrap up Ezekiel. So Monday, we will look at chapters 46 and 47, And on that session, we're going to look at worship on the Sabbath day and on the Festival of New Moons. And then chapter 48 on Tuesday, we will conclude our look at the book of Ezekiel, and then we will break for Christmas before starting the book of Daniel. But I pray that this has been a help for tonight. Thank you for being here. I do truly appreciate it. It's a blessing to be with you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.